the little abstract. What I'm really talking about is effective communication skills. A little bit about myself. That's what I used to look like in my younger days when I was cool. Contact information, if by the end of the talk you still want to get in touch with me, that'll be up again at the end. At Mr. Jeff Main on Twitter. What I'm going to talk about this afternoon is a little bit about me, just why am I calling myself a Jedi, why the whole Jedi thing. Talking about a little bit of a problem that I think we have in the industry, some ideas of how to do better communications, maybe have a little bit of discussion about that, questions at the end. I'm going to breeze through this as quickly as I can so we can get to the more fun stuff later this evening. I've been in this industry for going on 34 years now. Spent quite a bit of time in the DoD in the early days. Been out in the private sector. As of September, it'll be officially 20 years. That's where I used to work primarily. So if you want to ask me about Snowden, I say this every time I speak, it costs you a drink. So and a little bit of a teaser. Is anybody going out to Vegas for Hacker Summer Camp next week? It's not too late. I'm going to be giving a talk at Bsides, Las Vegas, where I actually tell a little bit of a story about what happened to me 20 years ago at NSA and why I say I was the first Edward Snowden. It's a little teaser for you. While I was there, I started out as a cryptanalyst. I did things in the manual cryptography space. In fact, I was talking to John earlier. He was ex-Special Forces, and every time I hear somebody mention Special Forces, I ask him, have you ever heard of this thing? Special Forces call this the Whizzy Wheel. It's actually an algorithm. It's taking a Vignette square, which is ROT 1 through 26. That is the algorithm that Special Forces uses to do encryption with their one-time pads. At least that's how they did it a long time ago. And so I always ask, have you ever heard of that? And I said, oh yeah, I've seen those things all the time. So I invented that wheel. I'm not Vignette. That was a French guy from, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago. Anybody know what this movie is? This is kind of a movie-themed talk, Jedi Mind Trick, Star Wars. Anybody know what movie it is? Imitation Game. Anybody know what that thing is? Yep.
That's the bomb. Oh, no,
it's not the bomb. It's the Enigma machine. To put it in context of how old I am and how long I've been in the business, when I first started at NSA, the fact that we allies had broken the code on this thing was still a secret. Why do you think it was still a secret?
It was still in use.
It was still in use. It was only publicized that we knew how to break it. I think that came out in the late 80s, but it was because there was smaller Soviet bloc countries that were less important communications channels that were actually still using the machine into the 80s. About this movie? Sneakers. There's a book that came out, I think, earlier this year called Dark Territories. Anybody heard of this book? I'm not promoting it or anything, but the guy that I work with, I'll talk about him in a little bit, was reading it and sent out an email to a bunch of us that used to work together at NSA. He was reading this section in the middle there. NSA had a similar group, red teaming. This is the story of the early days of pen testing at NSA. Read on, read on, read on. You get to this little part here. The red team worked out of a chamber called the pit. Well, I used to work in the pit. And we really were a group of hackers learning how to do pen testing, red teaming in the very beginning, back in the early to mid-90s. One of the guys that worked in the pit with me was a guy you might be familiar with. His name's Ron Gula. He's the founder of Tenable Network Security. That's how far back Ron and I do. Anyway, that's kind of a little 15 minutes of fame. I haven't read the book yet either, but several of the guys that have read it, and it's kind of humorous because, like most things, they get the story sort of right, but they miss out on certain key elements. And of course, we'll never correct them. We just kind of chuckle amongst ourselves. 20 years ago, I went out into the private sector, greener pastures, wanted to do pen testings, go work for a startup, boutique security company. You teach everybody how to be secure and make the world a better place. Pen testing, vulnerability assessments, back when it was convincing people why they needed to have a firewall if they were going to be on the internet and all the other things that go with it. Which meant we did a lot of security program development and architecture in the early days. I pissed off somebody somewhere along the line and I ended up in the PCI world. I was actually at QSA for 10 years. Until Tenable came along about 3 years ago and saved me and said, hey, why don't you come over to be a PCI subject matter expert? You've been in the business a long time. Ron's an old friend of mine. I said, why don't you come and just start doing the lecture circuit, the speaking circuit? You got a few cool things to talk about. So here I am. I've been with Tenable for the last 3 years. That's the only time I'm going to mention Tenable. But if you're not sure about Tenable, Nessus security scanner, the vulnerability scanner, that's us. I was going around last year giving a talk called The State of Information Security and going to a lot of conferences, Bsides, DerbyCon, Circuit CityCon, DEFCON, things like that. I hear a lot of great talks by a lot of really smart people like we've heard today. And what started nagging at me was, there's a lot of people talking about how we know what's wrong with everything. And, all sorts of different places, all sorts of different groups, lots of smart people. And yet, really bad things are still happening to a lot of different companies. And I put this slide together a year ago, so there's probably more things different companies you can put up there. So I started thinking, what's wrong? I mean, why do all the smart people not seem to get the point across, the message across to the people within their companies, or if you're a consultant or an auditor, your customers, why aren't they getting the answer? And that was sort of the genesis of this talk. I thought, I've been a consultant for 20 years, and I think I've done a pretty good job over the years of trying to help educate my customers on why security matters, why they shouldn't do certain things, why they should do other things. So I thought I'd pull together a talk that kind of talked about some of the things that I have learned to do over the years in terms of communication that I thought would benefit the rest of the community. I'm sure there's smart people out there, academics that have got, studied this and they have names for all the different techniques I use. And I didn't bother trying to figure them out, at least initially. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I've learned over the years, tricks, Jedi mind tricks. One of the problems I think beyond the lack of communication is, and we have to do the pop quiz, movie?
2001.
2001, and that is the HAL
9000.
Do you remember the crypto wheel I showed you earlier, the whiz wheel? That actually has its cryptographic cost signal or designation is actually the HAL 1. So when we invented it and figured out what we were going to call it, we were like 998 to get. My point here is that we tend to focus on the technology. We understand the technology. Obviously, we work with people that don't have a deep understanding of the technology, and somehow we have to bridge that gap. But too often it seems like we focus on the technology and we lose people. And we lose the people that are the decision makers, the money makers, the bean counters, the people that are going to invest in the technologies that you necessarily have to have, but also in the training and putting in the processes and things like that. Movie? Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2, also known as. I'm, part of this Jedi mind trick idea, and I cross over into Star Trek because I'm more of a Trekkie, is, can we do something different? Does anybody know what the Kobayashi Maru is? Can somebody explain it?
It was an unpassable test for incoming Starfleet captains.
Yep. Exactly. The idea of the Kobayashi Maru is it's the unwinnable scenario. They're sort of wargaming. It's a live exercise. In later years, they did it on the holodeck, but back in the 80s when the movie came out, they hadn't come up with that yet. But the idea is to see how the captain or the potential captain would react in an unwinnable situation. And in the movie Star Trek 2, the Wrath of Khan, they keep talking about how Kirk had beat it, how Kirk had defeated it. He was the only one in the history of Starfleet Academy that had actually beaten the test. And at the spoiler alert, is that okay? If you haven't seen the movie by now, cover your ears. But at the end, it turns out that he basically hacked the program and rewrote the code so that there was a scenario, a winning situation that he could manipulate. That's sometimes the mindset that we need to have. And to me, the puzzle is, how do you get the information to the right people so that they can make the right decision? And if we can be really honest with ourselves, I think this is a huge part of the problem. I don't think I saw any of this today particularly. But we in the community tend to sometimes have a little bit of an ego and have a little bit of an attitude. And I've heard it expressed in many ways in many different locations. But, referring to even, there's the techies and the non-techies, the smart and the stupid, referring to the non-technical people as muggles. All of this sets up, if they overhear it, these are the people that you're trying to make a decision. You're trying to convince them. If you go in with, well, you're stupid and you don't understand what I'm talking about, this is what I need you to do, may not be the best attitude. So anyway, moving on to what can we try different? What can we do differently in terms of the techniques? At the very beginning, if you're approaching what I will call an audience, and you have a message that you want to get across, your audience can be one person, it can be a group, it can be a group of managers, it could be your team members, it could be your boss, it could be public speaking where you're speaking to a larger audience. But one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is try to get to know the audience a little bit, just to try to understand what their frame of mind is, where they're coming from, what's their understanding level. So often what I will do is just take something that's somewhat innocuous, maybe related, maybe not related, and just kind of break the ice. It's actually a term that's used in group dynamic settings, an icebreaker. So for example, raise your hand, I'm going to use my fancy pointer, if you think Black Hat is the best hacker movie ever made. Nobody has ever raised their hand for that. How about Enemy of the State? No? War Games. 1. Yay. Sneakers? 2. Okay. Got a few more handfuls. Hackers. Couple. Firewall. Swordfish. I just throw some of these out arbitrarily. How many of you have never seen any of these movies that I have up here? Okay. I realize it's a little bit dated. Why is War Games known as it's a lot of people say that's one of the more popular.
Couplers, man.
Yes.
It's the only way to hack. But even to this day, the methodology of hacking that's portrayed in War Games is still fairly accurate. Sneakers is popular for a lot of people because it really introduces social engineering. I was talking with somebody last night, I don't know if they're in the room or not, but there's a scene in Sneakers. We were talking about how do you defeat intrusion detection systems, how do you defeat the monitoring technologies. There's a scene in Sneakers where Robert Redford, the main character, is trying to break into a room, and they heat the room up to body temperature because there's a sensor in the room that will detect if there's a temperature deviation, which a body walking into the room would trigger. And he also has to move really, really slowly because there's a motion detector in place, but his movements, and I forget what the details were, but he could only move like an inch a minute or something like that. So they don't show the whole thing, obviously, but there's a scene where he's moving really slowly, and he's sweating because the room is 98.6 degrees. Hackers, it's got Angelina Jolie. But it really sort of introduced, in my opinion, the culture that we've come to know, the hacker culture.
But the initial raid scene alone is worth it, though. Like the disproportionate response to this kid.
Yep. Anyway, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter what your favorite hacker movie is. It does give you an idea if you're talking to an audience, where people are at. Most people didn't raise their hand for any of this, so I'm thinking you're a lot younger than all of me and you haven't seen these movies. How about this one? Yeah? A little bit better? Okay. The next important thing, and this is a really, really super important thing, is when you're trying to communicate with someone, you need to be able to listen to people. And there's all sorts of different ways of listening. I actually did a workshop on the Jedi mind tricks about a month and a half ago at a conference called Circle City Con. I don't know if if anybody's heard of that con. It's up in Indianapolis. We got into this discussion about how millennials, young people that live on their technology and their phones, how they don't necessarily have a lot of training or skill or experience in listening, especially in terms of picking up nonverbal communication, body posture, the way people are sitting, the way people are moving, facial expressions and things like that. And somebody was saying, well, young people, they just use a string of emoticons, and we were talking about whether maybe that's a new language that some of us need to learn learn how to read emotion. Because a lot of times what you're reading in nonverbal is the emotions that people are experiencing. So anyway, movie?
Build dreams.
Build dreams, very good. Listening. Part of listening is also hearing what they say so you can learn to speak their language. This is not technically a movie, but has anybody seen this TV commercial? What's going on here? It's, frog protection. Do you have frog protection? Yes, we offer frog protection. Frog protection? Yes, frog protection. Are we saying the same thing? We're absolutely saying the same thing. We're on the same page. So I learned very early and practice this often is when you're communicating with people, you need to listen to what they're saying because that'll help you pick up on whether they're picking up on what you're saying, frankly. And sometimes if you think that they're not getting it, you kind of have to regroup and try a different way of explaining things to them. So, it takes practice, it takes time, but the more you've gotten to know your audience, the more chances you have of, trying something different. Walk into an office where you're having to talk to a manager and you see a trophy case behind him, he's got a bunch of kids, and the kids play, let's say, football or baseball. Maybe you can think of a football or a baseball analogy to use. The case that I'm going to be talking about, my experience that I'm going to be talking about in Vegas that happened 20 years ago, the manager in that context, I found out before I was going to speak to him that he was a car nut. And he had a particular type of car. He was a car collector, member of a car club. It was a little bit of a different motivation, but I told him at the end of our initial meeting where we were just kind of going over the ground rules of what we were going to be doing for him. I said, hey, how's your cherry red, whatever the car was, doing? And he was like, and I was just trying to prove to him that, we're hackers, we know all about you. It works. And what I'm getting to is, as you're learning people and trying to find different analogies, different ways of getting the point across, very often you have to tell stories, analogies, paint a picture, break it down. Anybody know what movie this is? Big Fish. Very good. Sometimes you might embellish the story, and sometimes it may not be completely accurate, or it may not be a completely relevant or sensible analogy. But if it helps you get the point across, it's a good thing to try, especially if you have to do it repeatedly. I'm a former cryptanalyst by trade at NSA. Talking about encryption and cryptography, especially in my PCI days, used to come in handy, but very often, people start talking about different algorithms, AES, RSA, DES, triple DES, this, that, the other, key lengths, bit lengths. You lose people very quickly. And I can geek out on cryptography, but most people, I don't get a chance to talk that level with most people. But I did a presentation a year and a half ago that they wanted me to just go over some of the encryption technologies that are becoming popular in the payment space. Things like end-to-end encryption, things like tokenization. And I gave a little bit of a background slide, but I started by saying, this is how cryptography works. This is very, very oversimplified, but you have something that's green, that's something data, that's a message that you want to make unreadable. You have to combine it with a key, some sort of random stream, using some sort of mathematical algorithm, which I presented as a plus sign. And equals, you get the stuff you can't read at the end. I had a woman come up after me after I gave this talk, and she said, I just went through the CISSP exam, and I learned more in your talk than my whole training. Not that I want to be a CISSP OSP instructor. But sometimes you can break it down. And is this 100% technically accurate applied to all encryption algorithms out there? No. But it gets the point across. And sometimes when you're talking to a non-technical person, all you need to do is get the point across, the main theme. Movie? Office. It's really important to have people skills when you're trying to communicate with people. And I've heard this a lot in various presentations where people sort of touch on the need for communication. It's really helpful if you understand what business you're in. I even take it further, especially when I was doing the PCI stuff. I would ask companies, what is it you're trying to protect? And they're like, well, credit card data, though, obviously. I said, okay, where is it? Well, that was one of the big exercises, is trying to find everybody. But a lot of times companies, and we talk about it even amongst ourselves at all these conferences, we talk about the need for security. We don't often talk about what it is we're trying to protect. What's the business? What is the sensitive data? What is the valuable data? And once you've discovered it and what it is, then you have to figure out where it is. And depending on what business you're talking to, what company you work for, or what customer that you have, what business they're in, the talks about what we need to do in terms of security and what we're trying to communicate can vary greatly. There's a lot of companies just really care less. I mean, I spent 10 years in PCI going to grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, department stores, shoe store. I was going to say the customer, these storage companies. You can run a storage space. All these companies 20 years ago could care less about security. They had no interest in security whatsoever. But then things changed and they had to start worrying about security. But they're not nearly as worried about security as, say, a government agency or, let's say, a financial institution or insurance company. So you kind of have to learn to temper what you're trying to communicate based on what the business is. And the better you can understand the business, the more comfortable your audience is going to be saying, oh, you understand what our pain points are, what our challenges are. Let me listen to you more carefully because you're obviously here to help solve the problem. You're not here just ramming something down our throats. We need to spend millions of dollars on this stuff that I don't understand. Which you do want them to do, but you have to ease them into it. Movie? This is usually the stumper.
It's Pulp Fiction.
It's not Pulp Fiction. Good guess. The Long Kiss Goodnight, yes. Do you remember what he says in the movie that makes this slide relevant? He says, don't ever make an assumption because you end up making an ass out of you and umption. So you might think you've done a great job breaking things down, putting it in terms that they can understand, telling stories and painting analogies, putting it in the lay language, speaking in the language of your audience. It's a great, and I used to use this all the time, it's a great interactive method to figure out if you're being successful. To simply ask, what did you just hear me say? And let them repeat it back to you. Unfortunately, very often, and I was pretty good at it, you get something where you're like, whoa, they're really off base. So that's when you sort of rinse, lather, and repeat, and you go back and try a different story, try a different approach, try a different analogy. I put this in almost for legal terms, but when you're making big decisions, very often, get the stuff in writing, just for so many reasons. But if it's a big, pivotal decision, if there's a lot of money involved, if your job's on the line, or it could be, get the decision in writing and make sure that the right level of management's the one signing off on it. And also, be prepared to not win every battle. Be prepared to compromise. That's not a word that we understand in our culture these days. But if you can get them to do a little bit more that's a little bit better than what you really want them to do, that's a win. You can double back later. You can ease them into it. So be prepared to compromise. Movie? This is pretty easy now. There you go. I found very often, especially as a consultant, especially in the early days when we were doing the pen tests and the vulnerability assessments, and going in and telling them everything that's wrong, what they needed to fix. And actually, the legacy is I learned this lesson from my father. How many people have daddy issues? It's really good if you're going to give bad news to somebody, if you're going to tell them that something's really bad. Start with something good. So you've done a pen test of their website. Say, hey, your website's really cool. It's laid out well. It's organized well. Pretty colors. I like the font. Say something good about it before you ease into the bad and ultimately the ugly. And I learned this lesson as a young person. I never got straight A's in school. Not because I was dumb, because I was bored. But one time I tried really hard to get straight A's. I wanted to get straight A's just once, just to say I had done it. And I think I got 6 A's and a B. And I forget what I got the B in. I brought my report card home. This was the best report card I ever had. I showed it to my dad. What do you think the first thing was that he said?
The best you could do, son.
Why did you get the B? So I'm stunted because of that. So, I'm flying through this, but, these are just techniques that I've learned over the years that we can all apply in whatever role we're in, whether it's our peers, our management, higher level management. It's not an exact science, it's an art form, but there's different ways, and I think there's a real need for us as a community to learn the communication skills that are necessary. Movie?
Dangerous.
Am I asking a lot? Is there a lot involved here? Yeah, this is almost as complicated as it is to learn how to do pen testing and learn how to break things. In fact, in some ways, breaking things is easy. Fixing things so that they can't be broken can be really hard. And communicating it to companies why you need to fix things and why things are the way they are. This can be very daunting. So sometimes you may want to wish that you had taken a leap. I've heard it said at a lot of conferences, people talking kind of on this subject and security in general. They talk about it being a game. The company that I said I wouldn't mention again that I worked for, our theme last summer at Black Hat was a video arcade. We were a retro 90s video arcade. So we were all about leveling up to the next level of security. Big theme. It was really cool. You got these big tokens because we were in Vegas, and you could bring the thing in, and we actually had a video arcade in our booth. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not a game. Movie? I think of security, and especially getting the message across and getting things to be as secure as you need them to be in whatever your environment is. I think of it more as a puzzle. And when I say that, it's a little bit of my crypto background, I guess, but there isn't always just one solution. There might be multiple solutions to the puzzle. And you might have to work at it really hard, and you might have to keep trying, and it may be daunting. But, if you haven't figured it out yet with games, with video games, you ultimately walk away a loser in most cases. I'm thinking video arcades. Eventually your money runs out and you gotta walk away. Movie? Mercury Rising, very good. Little NSA tie-in and all that kind of stuff. So, one of my few bullet slides, and you can read through that. I'm just summarizing hopefully some of the things that I've said to you already. A lot of this, especially when you're in a position where you're trying to make change, the idea of building a trust relationship is pretty valuable. If you're a trusted part of the company, if you're a trusted part of the decision-making process, and you've earned that trust because you've made the people feel comfortable, you've made them feel understood, they feel like you're listening to them as much as they're listening to you, that's huge in terms of building trust. That'll get them to take a chance. Okay, I didn't want to spend the money, but maybe we should. And it's not necessarily just money on technology. Again, it could be investing in more people. It could be investing in training. It could be any number of things. It's not too late to talk to your bosses if you're in that type of situation and sending you out to Vegas next week, for example. And again, the idea of compromise and perfect security. If you haven't figured it out yet, security is not a place that you get to and you're done. Security is really more like a lifestyle. I mean, this is something you do continuously. I've been in this business a long time, and the talk that I was going around giving last year, the state of information security, my entire presentation, my punchline is, the entire presentation I gave, which is you need to have programs, processes, people, and do all this, that, and the other. It was a talk I gave in 1998, verbatim. And I presented it as, this is new and fresh, and this is what we need to do. And everybody's, yeah. And then I'd say, by the way, this is what we've been saying for 30 years. So, this is what we're really after, movie. Okay, so you got the analogy, changing the culture is kind of like turning the Titanic. You know, you can do it, it takes time, and if you do it too late, you run into large objects. So, don't wait for somebody else to do it, lead by example, take a chance, you know, try doing communication. I had somebody ask me after a talk, said, whoa, you know, we've got all these problems in our company, just like you're saying, what should we do? I said, go find somebody and talk to them. Find somebody that's not in your group. Talk to them. Ask them what they do. Offer what you do. But mostly ask them what they do. It's okay to be confident, just don't be egotistical and arrogant. I'm sure you've all been to enough conferences, you know who I'm talking about, or you know the type of person. It doesn't have to be personal. I think you need to speak their language. You need to be bilingual, right? I always used to say, when I sort of got out of the pen testing business and more in the consulting business, I could talk to the techies because I could speak their language. I kind of lived it. But I could also talk to the business people because I'm technically a business major. And I could understand the business and speak their language and put it into terms that they understood. I think more of us need to be able to do that. And if you know something, teach somebody. And again, learn to listen. If you get really good at it, you go to conferences where they hire artists that draw these really cool things while you're giving your talk. And it will summarize everything you just said. So that's something to aspire to. Oh, it's really awesome. And they're like, here, it's yours to keep. I'm like, I'm in San Francisco. I have really cool photographs of it. Any questions, comments? This is all about communication. Now's your chance. Agree, disagree, have war stories, things that you tried that worked, that didn't work. Is it time to go drink yet?
On the ask them to repeat back what they just heard from you, do you have some sort of rule of thumb of how often to ask? Because like once at the end of the meeting seems too late, and every time you say something seems too often.
I mean, after every major theme, really. I mean, that should be early and often. Because the longer you wait, the more you have to back up. So, and you don't want to overdo it. But I did look up a little bit of the science of this because I taught the workshop, and there's basically two types of communication. One is you're teaching. Two is you're trying to convince somebody to buy something. Okay? So, the more you can apply, the more you can practice, the earlier you do it, the more likely you're going to teach them, the more likely you're going to get them, mostly in our context, we're trying to get them to buy something. And, understand that I'm using an analogy, but that's really what this is all about in our business. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Liken it to something I had happen in a doctor office recently. I moved here a year ago, went to a new doctor, and one thing they asked was, what kind of learner are you? Do you like pictures? Do you like instruction? Do you like to do it yourself and be watched doing it?
Right.
Try to clue in on what the person you're dealing with keys in on.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting analogy because we all learn differently. We all take in information differently. And it's good to know that about yourself, and hopefully that helps you to pick up on the cues and the telltale signs when you're trying to communicate with others. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, we just went through Lean Six Sigma for one of our business processes. It wasn't anything related to security, but you realize how much people don't know about their own, what they do themselves. So it may take a while to dig into, if you're dealing with this type of stuff, it's going to take you long.
Yeah, I mean, at one level, these are just basic life skills. If you want to have like a successful, happy life, no matter what business you're in, you can benefit by learning to communicate and get along with others. Especially if they're college. So anyway, were there any other questions? I I have no idea how we're doing on time, but. Oh, okay. Well, then let's back up. Any more questions? Yeah, that's my contact information. It's pretty easy. J-NAM, just one N. If you do two N's, I will never see it. I'm embarrassed to say I'm wearing the same shirt. Don't tell my mom or my wife. And
I actually
live long and prosper. Yeah.
Okay, since this is so near to my heart, because as a developer who cares about security, and the number of times that we have to make it because of something else. And so sometimes, for example, security is not naturally a requirement for these systems for which it needs to be. And one of the reasons is that it is called a non-functional requirement. However, if non-functional is treated as we can worry about it later, then that's a non-starter, which means it has to become a code craftsmanship or quality of workmanship in the product and process in order to have a culture saying no matter how you feel about it, security is part of it. How, in your opinion, do we start changing that culture? Because, especially security professionals, if 80% of people in this room are on the red team and the blue team is drastically underrepresented, and either they're just trying to do their job, which was not to do security, or, let's face it, they're a junior developer or an outsourced provider who are in no power position to make it part of it. How do we create that culture? I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. What would you say as a discussion here? How do we make it a little bit better every year?
Anyone?
Sometimes it may take steering. If we don't spend time on security study X on our product, this is what I can hack into it with. And if I can do it, anybody overseas is eager to try. There's just dead on my end.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's too is just like
he raised his hand.
I'm sorry, he wins.
On top of that point, people say all the time that security is always viewed as an expense. And where people need to be scared is realizing that a business is going to pay an expense by getting hit. In a lot of ways, where there's failings in the development cycle even, means if you can say our software is secure and this is how it's secure, that all of a sudden becomes a valued asset for that thing instead of it just being, oh, this is something we have to do.
Right. Now you.
Well,
I
I'm
think
sorry. The hackable baby cam is secure.
Hey,
Yes, go. Sorry.
You already had your slide. No,
Yes,
but
I know.
sorry, these gentlemen here, until it's what's like Target, all that stuff, spearheaded people caring. And so I think a lot of times it's going to require something bad to happen first. Some of that stuff.
Well, historically that's true, and Target is interesting because I was in the PCI space. Target had a reputation for actually doing it right. I mean, they had a large security staff. Have a large security staff. They invested in a lot of security technologies, and when they got popped, that was a wake up call. It wasn't that people weren't caring. It was that wow, if it could happen to them, it could happen to us. I could do a whole 5-hour lecture on the PCI world. And there's a lot of companies out there that security is not their core competency, and they really don't care about it because they never had to care about it before. It's sort of one of the next talks I'm kind of working on that I'll give shortly, soon, maybe next year. But I come from the DoD world, and I used to get when I was in the PCI world, and I was I can say it publicly, I was the QSA for the TJX companies for 6 years after their breach. So I'm very intimately aware of large retailers and what they struggle with to be secure and go through the scrutiny of the FTC and try to be PCI compliant and still try to make money and to be a successful, profitable business. And I would have very long discussions with people there explaining what all this security meant. And very often they'd say, yeah, but we don't need DoD level security. They need my background. And after the Target breach, the Home Depot breach, and so on and so forth, I started thinking to myself, yeah, we kind of do. But again, it's security in its very nature is reactive. If you stop and think about it, everything we know about security and what we do in terms of pen testing and defense and red teaming and whatnot, it's all based on somebody's done it. There's very little, and it's very difficult for developers to try to anticipate and figure out all the things that can go wrong and all the things that can happen and implementations that can go bad and so on and so forth. So it's really a culture. It's really a mindset. Yes?
So I'm not hearing the same message, right? So PCI,
What are you hearing me say?
Well, so for PCI, for instance, right?
Yep.
Maybe that's the minimum amount of standards for security.
Disagree, but go ahead.
And the clients see it as all in.
Yeah.
Right?
They absolutely
They
view it
go
as
over and
that.
above those minimum set of requirements.
I mean, I'm gonna. They said I can take as much time as I want.
Yes.
So, how many people know or are familiar with PCI at all?
Great 98 pages.
You know it exists.
I've read it.
PCI has 6 major goals, and bear with me. Build a secure network. Okay. Protect the data. Keep the systems current. Test them. Control access to users, control access to the data through access controls, and wrap it all up in a written policy set of procedures. Based on my 30 plus years of experience, I think that's a fairly comprehensive framework for security. What's missing? That's why I disagree that it's a bare minimum. It's pretty comprehensive. Now, does it get specific into the technologies and the changing things and all that kind of stuff? No. But it never was intended to be. It's a framework more than anything. I'll get off my soapbox. Did I answer or address your question at all? Or did I just make you mad?
No, it wasn't a question. It was just
It's just an observation. But what's wrong with PCI is the way that most companies have approached it is what's the bare minimum I need to do to make this go away? Not, oh, this is a pretty decent security standard. I should follow this for not only my credit card data, but for whatever data I have that's sensitive to whatever degree within our company.
And you should internalize it.
Yes.
You don't want to do that.
I have to convince people to spend money at companies on things that they don't care enough about, like accessibility and user experience. And so one of the ways that I get traction is by talking about liability.
Yeah.
People might not understand why it is you want them to do something that you want them to do, but if you start talking about liability, that suddenly sounds inevitable, important, and expensive, and people will get behind
But we've
it.
solved that problem too, because now we have cyber insurance. There's a friction between we know what needs to be done and what's right, and companies out there that don't understand and don't care about security. They just want to make money. What's the bare minimum? How can I dodge this one too? And there's no good answer for it. But I think for me, the bottom line is more of us need to learn how to communicate and educate, because a lot of security is pretty common sense when you get down to it. And if you knew better, you probably wouldn't do it. You're the company that's doing the stupid things, but they don't know any better. And I can shove it in your face, aren't you stupid? Or there's this thing that I've heard that maybe, yeah, that's how this is here. You should change that default password because everybody can do this. It's not an exact science, but I think we all need to become educators and teachers. And I think that's the only way that we ever get from reactive mode to the life cycle culture. Yes? They all want to get their prizes and go eat and drink. That's it.
Thank you.